dance night, guys. Come on. All right, thank you very much. Okay, just really quick announcements. Matt, first Vacation Liberty School.
We're about 3 weeks away from kicking off our first Vacation Liberty School in Fredericksburg. We're very excited, and there are a couple of quick things. We have some posters. You may have noticed a large poster on the door as you came in, and then a smaller one right by the sign-up area. And if you have a business in town and would be willing to take one of those, or tell me where to bring them, and we'll bring them on Friday and then put posters up. We have about 10 of the big ones and 20 of the little ones, so it's not like we have piles and piles of them. And we'd like to get those around town this Friday. There are still 2 things that we need. We need some room dividers, and I've talked to this about the last couple of meetings. We still need some room dividers to keep from having to build some. So if you know, if you're a social club or church or anybody has your room dividers and they're stuck back in there somewhere, you sure like to be able to borrow them. We still need a chalkboard and or a whiteboard on an easel. And if anybody has one of those we use for the week, we still need volunteers. We've already done all the heavy lifting, so you just need to show up and help hold the other end of the board. And we can use all the volunteers we can get, even if it's for one night, or if you can commit to the entire week, then please talk to me tonight. And or any of the other 3, there's Roy Sand and Carol and Richard and Jerry Farley is usually around here somewhere. Talk to any one of us, we'll be able to tell you what volunteers can do. And sign up your kids. Anybody you know with kids 10 to 15 years old, get them interested in this. It's going to be really, really good. We're really excited about it. And thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Matt. We got to get them while they're young. Tanya, you want to say a moment? Tanya's going to come up and talk about Appleseed real quickly. Here's what I found out when I went the first time. That if I was on our side of the Revolutionary War, we would have lost. So I need to go back for remedial training.
It's a big group in Florida.
Well, if you haven't heard about Appleseed, it's the Revolutionary War Veterans Association.
I'm not in one place long enough.
Heritage and Marksmanship Program. We brought it to Fredericksburg 3 years ago, and we shoot out at the Texas Hill Sporting Range, 12.5 miles out Tybee Road. It is a fabulous way to celebrate this weekend. We're going to have a shoot, and it's also a great way to celebrate our freedoms and our liberties. We do storytelling about what led up to April 19, 1775, which you will learn is the day the Revolutionary War began, but not the day the Revolution began. So come and find out what that's all about. And we have really terrific instructors. You'll learn the 6 steps to an accurate shot, and you'll get to do plenty of training. But if you're good enough and you can shoot a 210 on the Army qualification test, then you will earn your rifleman badge. We actually have a lot of people in Gillespie County who purport to be very good shooters, but not that many are able to earn this patch. So women are $10 a day. If you're under 21, you are $5 a day. Military shoot for free, and otherwise it's a very affordable weekend anyway. You can come out and just observe, bring a picnic lunch. We'll do storytelling during our breaks and at lunchtime. And like I said, just want to invite everyone to come out and get involved. I have a few flyers that are on the table at the end there where Matt has his flyers, so feel free to pick one up, and I hope to see you all out there.
Thanks, Tanya. It's really good. It's a really good event, and you really learn a lot about the history. So it's a fantastic thing of your time to do. Okay, one last point before we introduce our guests. So we're going to do the annual July 4th parade float. So we're looking for volunteers that want to help. If you have any creative bent, let me know. We'd love to have you help out. Matt's going to think about maybe seeing if some of the kids that go through the Vacation Liberty School program would mind being on the float with us. So we'll see about that. So if you have any ideas or willing to volunteer to help out, we'd love to have your assistance. So now I'm going to have Kent Fields please to introduce our honored guests.
Our guest this evening is Chris Ann Hall. She's an attorney and former prosecutor who has the distinction of having been hired for teaching the Constitution to Tea Party groups. Thank you. She would not sacrifice liberty for a paycheck. She's a disabled veteran of the U.S. Army, a Russian linguist, a mother, a pastor's wife, and a patriot. She now travels the country and teaches the Constitution and the history that gave us our founding documents. She presents the genealogy of the Constitution, the 700-year history, and 5 foundational documents that are the very roots of American liberty. She was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. She received her undergraduate degree in biochemistry from Blackburn College. It says here in 1991. I don't see how someone who's now maybe 16 could have been in college in 1991. And her JD from the University of Florida, Levin College of Law. She's a former Russian linguist for the U.S. Army. KrisAnne worked for several years as a state prosecutor and 2 years with a prominent law firm defending religious liberty and First Amendment rights. She now resides in North Florida with her husband Chris, who is a pastor, as I mentioned, and former foreign language instructor for the U.S. Navy, and her son Colin. She's the author of a number of books, not a living, breathing document proclaiming our Constitution. And by the way, these materials are available for sale in the back of the room. A book called The Roots of Liberty, The Historic Foundations of the Bill of Rights. A children's book, 2 children's books. Bedtime stories for budding patriots, for the little kids. And essential stories for junior patriots. She tells us that 2 books that inspired her love of history were The Founding Brothers by Joseph Ellis and 1776 by David McCullough. She's been awarded the Freedom Fighter Award by Americans for Prosperity, the Certificate of Achievement for the Sons of the Revolution for her defense of liberty, and the Congressman James Blair Award for defending the Constitution. She is a true Patrick Henry of our time. She speaks to audiences all across the country, including us, on constitutional history, on American exceptionalism and the fight for liberty. She has a long seminar, a 5-hour seminar. It's in 5 segments, which is called The Roots of a Liberty Seminar. She presents, as I said, the 700-year history that gave us our founding documents, proving that our founding documents were not created on a whim, and that they are reliable and relevant, and why it is important to know not only what your rights are, but why you have them. I'm informed that KrisAnne will be presenting her seminar in San Angelo in September, which I think is a marvelous opportunity for us. I encourage all of you who can to attend that. I think she will have the details later, and we will publish that on our website. In addition to the history of the Bill of Rights, KrisAnne presents each of the first 10 amendments in their context, in the words and history of our founders. She also presents the 17th Amendment and what we must do to make our federal politicians accountable. Please welcome KrisAnne Hall.
Can you hear me now? It helps to turn it on, right? Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me into your home. I love coming to Texas. Since I started speaking, I've been blessed to be here at least twice a year. And last year I was here 3 times. So I'm a little behind this year. I'm ready to come back. And like I said, in September, on September 22nd, I was in San Angelo last night and spoke to them as I'm speaking to you now. And I'm pleased to say they were so excited about what they heard, they immediately scheduled my 5-hour seminar for September 22nd. So that's going to be held in one of their local churches. They say they have a seating capacity of 500. So there is plenty of room for everyone, and I hope that we'll be able to see you there. And we are going to have to really roll up our sleeves and do something if we're going to fix this. Because we're behind the curve. We did not get here overnight. We're not going to fix this in one term. We knew that in 2010. I think what's happening now is we're just slightly disappointed in the people that we elected in 2010 that promised us that they would be defending the Constitution, and yet here we are. And I don't know about you, but in the state of Florida, every single candidate that we elected who promised the Tea Party people that they would be constitutional conservatives and put the Constitution and liberty first have failed. Every single time the Constitution or an issue of the Constitution has been on their chopping block, they have voted against it. NDAA, HR 347, Senate Bill 1813, Patriot Act. Each and every time, every single one of our Florida representatives and senators have voted against the Constitution. But you have to see, it's going to take us a little while. I don't think they really took us seriously in November, and we're just going to have to stick to our guns and make sure they understand that we are serious about the Constitution and we are serious about putting liberty first. Because our founders put liberty first. Our founders created a nation focused almost primarily on liberty. But we really don't have a really good understanding of liberty today. You see, we take an oath. We just took it. How many of you believe that your oaths never expire? There's never an expiration date on them. Well, you take one every time you say the Pledge of Allegiance, don't you? That's what a pledge is. It's an oath. The problem is the people that we elect seem to not understand what that oath is. And frankly, if you don't understand the oath that you're taking, it's as if you're taking no oath at all. It's an empty promise. I pledge allegiance to the flag, not to a piece of cloth, right? But to the United States of America and to the republic for which that flag stands, right? It's the republic, by the way, and not the democracy. I received an email from my senator bragging on the fact that our Senate was passing a resolution that would ensure that we would help Egypt establish a pure democracy. I immediately wrote him and said, "Are you kidding me? If we ensure that Egypt establishes a pure democracy, we will ensure that our enemy establishes a leadership role in that country and will oppress the people of that nation." Because we should not be running around trying to establish democracies. We should be establishing republics, because only in a republic do you have liberty, because only in a republic does a minority have a society-changing voice. And so, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible. You realize we are one nation under God and not one nation under government. So many of us in this nation have forgotten that. But there's another important part of that. One nation under God, indivisible. You see, we are only indivisible when we remain under God. If we continue to become one nation under government, we will continue to be more and more divisible every single day. Because government is divisive. God is unifying. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty. Notice it doesn't say with health care. Can I tell you something that might hurt a little bit? It doesn't say with a job, or a house, or a paycheck. It says with liberty and justice for all. You see, if we don't have liberty first, we never get to advance to the justice for all part. Because it's liberty that gives us a nation capable of believing that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Only with that focus in mind is there real justice, and I'm not talking about social justice. But what is liberty? Patrick Henry said, "What would gentlemen wish? What would they want? Is life so dear and peace so sweet to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God, I know not what course others may take, but give me liberty or give me death." You see, Patrick Henry was not simply saying, "I do not want to live if I cannot have liberty." His statement was so much deeper than that. Listen to what he said. What would gentlemen wish? What would they want? I want you people, he says, to sit down and think about what is your greatest wish as a nation? What could you possibly want as a people? He says, I have the answer. Life, peace. Those are the two greatest things that a nation of people can achieve. Right? So you have those two great things. But are they so great and so dear to us that we would purchase them with chains and slavery? You see, what Patrick Henry was telling you is that without liberty, even our greatest accomplishments will be chains and slavery. Without liberty, your peace is slavery. Without liberty, your government, your education, your job will be slavery, and therefore your life will be servitude. John Adams said in 1765, it's liberty that must be supported at all hazards. Liberty. He said we have a right to it derived from our Maker. How many of you have heard of natural law? Well, if you've heard of natural law, then you've heard of a man by the name of John Locke. John Locke did not invent natural law. If you believe the principle of natural law, you understand that God invented natural law when he breathed life in Adam, because natural law says we are created in the image of God. And because we are created in the image of God, we've inherited certain things from God. Just like we are all biologically created in the image of our parents. My hair color and my eye color, they came from my father. And ladies, the older I get, the more I look in the mirror, the more I see my mother. Right? That's what it means to be created in the image of something. And we are created in the image of God. We've inherited certain things from God. One of those things that we've inherited from God is freedom. God being the most ultimate free being in the universe, nobody wakes up and tells him how to run the universe. That's his job. We've inherited that freedom, believe it or not. We are free to do whatever it is that we can conceive. Problem is, we do not want to live in a nation that's free. We cannot live in a nation focused on pure freedom. Because if we do, that means I'm free to lie. I'm free to steal. I'm free to murder. I'm free to do whatever is right in my own mind, regardless of how that affects you. That's what freedom is, and freedom is anarchy. You see, liberty and freedom are not synonymous, and that's a very important thing that we forget. Because liberty is actually freedom plus morality. God, knowing we can't handle that kind of freedom, said, I'm going to give you a moral law. Thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not murder. Sound familiar? Those things that the ACLU don't want you to have in the schoolhouse or the courthouse anymore. Well, see, we can't live in a nation that's built on a moral law alone either. Because a moral law in the hands of men is a theocracy, and a theocracy in the hands of men is tyranny. That's precisely why Sharia law has no place in this nation. because Sharia law is anti-liberty and pro-tyranny. You see, our founding fathers were focused on liberty because liberty is that delicate balance of freedom and morality. Now, John Adams wrote this in a dissertation on canon and feudal law in 1765. He said, "Liberty must be supported at all hazards. We have a right to it derived from our Maker." I believe he was speaking to a very large audience, so maybe he was thinking that there were some people listening who did not believe in natural law or didn't know about it. So he continued and said, "But if we had not, liberty is a gift from God, but if we had not gotten it from God," he said, "our fathers have purchased it and bought it for us with their ease, their estates, their pleasure, and their blood." He's saying, I believe that liberty is a gift from God, but I also believe that you cannot deny that men and women have died so that we can have it today. And I think that we can probably echo that sentiment today. But he said that in 1765, which brings to light a very important understanding. How many of you have heard that the Constitution is a living, breathing document? You don't have to believe it. If you don't, I'm glad. If you do, I'm glad you're here, because I think I'm going to show you why it's not. But what I want you to do is ask yourself, you don't have to answer out loud or raise your hand, just ask yourself and say, I don't believe that the Constitution is a living, breathing document, but can I make a persuasive argument proving that it's not? Could I persuade Justice Ginsburg into the understanding that the Constitution is not a living, breathing document? Let me off your hook. Probably not. But you could someone else. You see, if you believe that the Constitution is a living, breathing document, whether you know it or not, you have to believe two things. You have to believe that our founding fathers were winging it. That they didn't know what they were doing, that they were just sort of making it up as they were going along. That they had no basis for the government that they built us, and they were just guessing. The other thing that you have to believe is in the erroneous definition of a word, experiment. Because what they'll do is they'll tell you, well, after all, of course it's a living, breathing document. Even your founders said that they were engaged in the grand Republican experiment, the grand government experiment. How many of you have heard that quote? The problem is, for the living people to produce that as an example, as proof that our founding fathers had no idea what they're doing, they have to alter the definition of that word experiment. And basically what they're telling you is that an experiment is where you take something over here, you're not quite sure what it is. And you take something over here, you're not quite sure what it is, and you throw it together and see what happens. But see, when I went to Blackburn College, my undergraduate degree was biochemistry. I've spent a few years in the laboratory. That's not an experiment, that's an explosion. An experiment under the true scientific method is this. You take something that you know absolutely everything you can possibly know about here, and you take something else and you know absolutely everything that you can know about it here. And before you put it together, you work out on paper what will happen when you put them together. You work it out on a computer. You do whatever. You do the facts and the figures, and you predict what will happen based on what you know about those things. And then, and only then, do you put those things together, not to see what will happen, but to prove what you already believe will happen, will happen. And that's what our founders were talking about when they said the grand Republican experiment. They took their history, something that they were intimately familiar with. They knew everything they could possibly know about it. They took human nature and the way we interact with government, all the studies that they've done all the way beyond Rome. And they got together and they debated and debated and debated pass the bill to read the bill. They debated long and hard over this. And then, after they had worked out the figures and what was going to happen and came to the conclusion of focusing on liberty, then and only then did they draft a document that would be focused on liberty. How many of you have heard that there were two camps of our founding fathers? One group, the Federalists, were for a large centralized government, and the other group, the Anti-Federalists, wanted to remain 13 separate states. Well, that's a lie. And all you have to do is read the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers to know the truth. Let me give it to you from a logical perspective. These men had just lost, many of them lost everything. Their families had died over a departure, a declaration of independence from the largest centralized government they'd ever known. Why in heaven's name would they make a sacrifice like that only to turn around and create another large centralized government? That makes no sense. The second bit of proof to that is the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation created a government so small that it failed. If I'm going to make a business proposal and I'm going to build semi-trucks, the first factory that I build will not be one that builds Hot Wheel cars. Right? Now, the Anti-Federalists were not for establishing and remaining 13 separate states because they were never 13 separate states. The Lee Resolution made 13 separate countries. A state does not exist on its own, it becomes a country. And they knew that if they remained so, they would be easily picked off. Now, there was some disagreement about how long that would take, but all you have to do is read Anti-Federalist Paper number 1 and find out that they were not opposed to the Constitution and the Union. As a matter of fact, it says we are not opposed to the Constitution, as long as it will ensure liberty, because the focus was liberty. But we know our founding fathers weren't winging it because John Adams just told us. Remember? Liberty must be supported at all hazards. We have a right to it derived from our Maker. But if we had not, our fathers have purchased it for us with their ease, their estates, their pleasure, and their blood. John Adams is saying, don't give me credit for this. This liberty's already been purchased for me. I'm just preserving it for you. So if we're going to understand liberty, we've got to understand who John Adams' fathers were. Who were the men that raised John Adams, that gave them this understanding of liberty, these principles for which they were ready to sacrifice everything and die for? And why? Well, what I want to do is I want to take you back to 1041 England, because in 1041 England has the most complex form of government in all medieval times. It's not great, but it's better than anybody else's. They have a common law system. And they have an agreement with their king that twice a year they would meet in a pre-designated place and meet with their barons and lords, and they would tell their barons and lords what they liked and what they didn't like about the kingdom. And the ideal was that the barons and lords would take that information to the king, and the king would do what with it? Whatever he wanted, right? Because he's king. But there's a fundamental thread that I want you to follow as we move through this little historical study. It's that government never gets it. And it's always the people. Remember? Of the people, by the people, for the people. Our founders didn't create a large centralized government. They created a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Otherwise, they would have made a government of politicians by our state capitals for Washington, D.C. And so this king is about to die. He has no son to take the throne for him, so he tries to appoint his second in command, whose name is Harold, to be King of England. The problem is, just because he doesn't have a son doesn't mean there's not an heir. And there is. His name is William I, and he lives in Normandy, and he's not happy that his throne is being passed on outside the bloodline. So William I, who is also, unfortunately for English people, known as William the Conqueror, raises his Norman army, goes over to England, conquers Harold and the English people, sets himself up on the throne. Now that might not be a very big deal, because that's how things went back then, right? I mean, we've all seen the knight movies and the kings fight, and that's how they get power and that sort of thing. Problem is, William was from Normandy and not from England. And England had the most complex form of government of all medieval times. He wasn't just taking over any country, he was taking over a country that had a common law system. And I believe that he was more attached to Normandy than he was to England. Because one of the first things that he does is he tries to change England into Normandy. How do you suppose he does that? Well, the first thing that he does is he starts replacing judges and corrupting the court systems. Replacing judges with judges that are loyal to the king, right? Why would he do that? Because he wants to take Norman law and enforce it in England. And he needs judges loyal to him to enforce his foreign law. He starts taking the land from the private landowners through threat and through force, so that he can hand the land, literally running the English people out of the country. So he can take the land from those landowners and hand it over to his foreign friends. I mean, how else do you keep foreign law and foreign rule in a nation if it's not full of foreigners? He starts establishing arbitrary taxations. He starts taking command of the churches, using the churches to collect his taxes. This goes on for about 40 years for the people. William I has 4 sons. His first son is killed in a hunting accident. His second son, when William I is on his deathbed, he and his second son get into a very big argument. So big that his second son does not take his rightful place on the throne, but runs off to fight in the Crusades, leaving 2 sons, William II and Henry I. William I dies, William II takes the throne. Shortly thereafter, William II and Henry I go hunting. And William II is killed in a mysterious hunting accident. Now, human nature never changes. There's nothing new under the sun. The people of England did not believe that Henry was not at fault. So they demanded there be a great investigation, and the government did an investigation, and they came to the conclusion that Henry was not at fault. Well, that didn't make the people feel any better, but I think they understood that if Henry had been found unfit for the throne, they'd have been in the same position they were 40 years ago with no heir and right for the conqueror. So the evil that you know is better than the evil that you don't know, so they allowed Henry to make 2 concessions. The first thing that he did was he married an Anglo-Saxon woman, which was the largest representation of Great Britain at that time. So what better way to appease the people than to appease the majority? The other thing that he did is why you got all this history. It's the most important thing that he did to us. He signed the first document in the genealogy of our Constitution. He signed the 1100 Charter of Liberties. The 1100 Charter of Liberties was Henry's promise to the people that he would no longer be evil and oppressive. Listen to what this 1100 Charter of Liberties says. I, Henry, by the grace of God, having been crowned the King of England, shall end all the oppressive practices which have been an evil presence in England. He's telling you, I'm not going to be evil and oppressive, and neither will any king after me. That's a pretty big promise, isn't it? Well, what's even more interesting is he went on to list all of the things that he would not do, so he would not be evil and oppressive. I'm going to give you a couple of them because I think they're very interesting. The first one is, if any baron or earl of mine shall die, his heirs shall not be forced to purchase their inheritance, but shall retrieve it through force of law and custom. In 1100 England, inheritance tax was evil and oppressive. Isn't that what inheritance tax is? Purchasing your inheritance back from the government? Do you know why that's evil and oppressive? It's because every day of your life you work, and you work hard, and you sacrifice to save something to pass on to your children. And when you die, it goes to its rightful owner, the government. And then your children, if they want a piece of what you've worked for, the property of the government, they must now purchase it back from the government so that they can go build an even greater treasure for the government, so when they die, their children have to buy it back too. How could we not believe that to be evil and oppressive? Well, the other thing was, if any of my barons commit a crime, he shall not bind himself to the crown with a payment as was done in the time of my father and brother, but shall stand for the crime as was custom and law, and make amends as are appropriate. In 1100 England, it was considered evil and oppressive for the men who made the laws to consider themselves above the law. Don't you wish Eric Holder had a little piece of that? I can't do the math anymore. I have at least 10 years of experience in the criminal justice system. I watched the Fast and Furious hearings. I can tell you with a prosecutor's confidence that if they had that type of evidence against me, I would not be getting a finger wagging from Daryl Issa. I would be under a federal prison. And so all this hand-wringing about what do we do about Eric Holder, oh, well, let's pass around this petition and demand that he resign, or we'll pass around this position and demand that the president fire him, is just absurd. You don't fire or allow criminals to resign. You indict them. Well, before you think we were better off in 1100 England than we are today, rest assured Henry didn't believe a word he was signing his name to. He was appeasing the people, but remember, the government never gets it. It's all about the people. And so when the most evil king that's ever taken the throne in England, even to this day, the people say that hell was fouled by the presence of John. Even John could not get away from the 1100 Charter of Liberties. You see, John was the most evil and oppressive king, not because of his level of taxation. He's actually the king that started income tax, but that's not why he was evil and oppressive. He was evil and oppressive because of the level of taxation. Taxed them to death, literally. He either took all of their substance so that they had nothing and they died, or if they could not pay their taxes, he would imprison them, mutilate them, and execute them. Because it's not about the money. You see, we are rarely taxed enough already. It's never about the money. It's about the tyranny. I would love our tea parties to stop saying taxed enough already and start saying tyrannized enough already. Because John was murdering people for not paying their taxes. You guys know John, actually. You may not know it right away, but you do. How many of you have heard of Robin Hood? That's King John, okay? Can I take a few seconds to give you a little idea of how deep your socialist indoctrination goes? Robin Hood's claim to fame is what? He robbed from the rich and gave to the poor, right? No. Robin Hood was not engaged in some grand socialist experiment of redistribution of wealth. Robin Hood, in the true legend, was stealing the money from the king that had been taken from the people through their oppressive taxations, returning it to the people so they could literally live to see another day. And there's evidence of this truth in the simplest form, because you can't hide the truth. How many of you have seen the Disney version of Robin Hood? I live in Florida, so nearly everybody's seen it there. Well, if you haven't, go watch it. If you have, go Go watch it again with a new set of eyes, and what you'll see is the king, who's a lion, say, taxes, taxes, glorious taxes, bleed them dry with beautiful taxes. And you'll see Robin Hood, who's a fox, always stealing from the king and his court to return the money to the people, so literally seconds later the sheriff of Nottingham could come in and take that money again. Well, as if murdering people to pay because they wouldn't pay their taxes is not enough, John does one thing that is the equal to the straw that breaks the camel's back for the English people, because they had the right to have rule over their own churches. They had that part of religious liberty. They had chosen a man named Stephen Langton to be their archbishop, and John simply said, no, I'm going to take control of your churches, and I don't like this guy. I'm going to pick who your archbishop is. And the people said, we've been tyrannized enough already. Enough is enough. Stephen Langton and the barons and lords that had been taxed out of existence created a committee of 25 men who drafted the Great Charter of England. You guys know it as the Magna Carta. Most of your constitutional studies will start you at the Magna Carta, but they're selling you short, because the Magna Carta does not stand on its own. The Magna Carta is a response to the 1100 Charter of Liberties. The 1100 Charter of Liberties, remember, is the promise, I will not be evil and oppressive. The Magna Carta is the people saying, hey, you promised not to be evil and oppressive. You obviously have no idea what you're doing. So what we're going to do is we're going to draft a set of guidelines to tell you what you can and cannot do, so you can make sure that you will not be evil and oppressive. You see, John forgot that one of the very first provisions in the 1100 Charter of Liberties said that the church will be free from government intrusion. Imagine that. What a novel idea all the way back in 1100 England. Well, this Magna Carta said, once again, that the church would be free, that there'd be no taxation without representation. The representation that the Magna Carta forms is a group of 25 common-born men who can tell the king no. You have to know that did not go over well. A king being told no. And you know what else? Clauses 39 and 40 are literally our 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendment rights to habeas corpus. You might think if our people in D.C. had realized that our rights to due process and habeas corpus were over 800 years old, they might have thought twice before they passed NDAA and the indefinite detention sections. Well, John signed the Magna Carta because he had a sword at his throat. He didn't believe any of it. But it's not about the government, because the government never gets it. The people do. It took a little while this time for the people to wake up again. It took about 400 years. So what I want to do is I want to take you to 1620. Charles I is now King of England. And the people have had an awakening because Charles is spending money like a madman. This is a very tumultuous time for Europe. It's a series of religious wars. And the English people said that Charles was romping around Europe, spending money on his every whim and fancy. He was engaging in war after war after war, and then turning back to the English people, because how does the crown recoup its money? Taxes, right? Well, the parliament and the people had had enough. And they said, we're not passing any more of these taxes. You're going to have to stop your spending. So what do you suppose Charles did? He dissolved Parliament. He said, fine, I'm the king. If you're not going to do this thing the way I think it needs to be done, I don't need you. I'll do it without you. Now, he wasn't going to stop his spending, of course, but he realized, because the Magna Carta says there'll be no taxation without representation, he dissolved Parliament. Don't tell me the logic there, because, you know, he can't dissolve Parliament anyway, but now he wants to follow the Magna Carta. And he says, well, I can't make a tax but I have to get money. So he passed a law called forced loans. It's still a tax though, right? And 8 knights refused to pay their forced loans, and Charles imprisoned them. 5 of them were brave enough to petition the king for the court for the right to habeas corpus, because they had that right, remember, in the Magna Carta? And you can actually go online and read the court transcript. It's in Old English, but you get used to it pretty easy once you read it a little bit. I'm going to give you the sort of modern language of a small section so you understand what was going on. The judge says to the court, we have these 5 knights before us that have petitioned the court for the right to habeas corpus, but they have no formal charges against them. You see, you can't have a day in court if there's no charges against you. And so the judge says, what is the court to do? Well, the only conclusion that this court can come to is that the crimes that these men have committed must be so heinous, so egregious, and such a threat to the people of this kingdom that we cannot inform the kingdom of the nature of these crimes through a formal charge, and therefore they cannot have their right to habeas corpus. Those 5 men died in prison. But a revolution was born, bringing us the 3rd document in the genealogy of our Constitution, the Petition of Right of 1628. Remember, the 1100 Charter of Liberties says, I will no longer be evil and oppressive. The Magna Carta says, we're going to help you figure out how to do that. We're going to give you the guidelines. The Petition of Right of 1628 is a list of grievances on how the king has broken the promise in 1100 and violated the provisions of the Magna Carta. But there's a very small sentence in the beginning, opening paragraph of the Petition of Right of 1628 that I think goes unnoticed many times. But we have to understand that the government never gets it, and the people do. And it says something, it says this, that liberty is the inherent possession of men and not the gift of the government. You see that awakening that's happening in the people? The understanding that liberty is inherent, that it's here, and no one gives it to you. Can I give you a little illustration to help you understand, I think, proof of why liberty is inherent, of the fact that liberty is inherent? I'm going to suggest to you that you're here today because each and every one of you had a moment. A moment where you saw something on the news, you heard something on the radio, you saw something on TV, a friend said something to you, you read something in the paper, and you said, wait a minute, something's wrong. That does not sound right at all. I'll suggest to you that you came to that conclusion on your own and nobody taught it to you. Because if someone had taught it to you, you could have dismissed it. But because it was something that you had an awakening to, a realization of, it nagged you and would not leave you alone until you figured out what it was that was wrong. It made you reach out to other people. It made you join groups so that you would know you were not crazy and you were not alone. You see, I think that's just a little piece of evidence of the fact that liberty is here and not here. And the unfortunate reality is the death of liberty occurs in 12 inches because it never transfers from here to here. Well, Charles didn't believe anything that he was signing, and he went on with business as usual. Problem is, whatever happened in 1621 was huge for the people. It was a big awakening, because now they were watching Charles like a hawk, and they were discovering some things about Charles. They were watching what he was saying and then watching what he was doing, and they were discovering that Charles was speaking out of both sides of his mouth. You see, it was about religious wars at that time, and Charles would stand loyal to the kingdom and loyal to the Church of England. But they were noticing that he was more likely loyal to the religion of their enemy. And he was spending his money because he was funneling their money to aid the enemy efforts. They brought Charles up on charges of treason. They tried him, they found him guilty, and they sentenced him to death, and gave us the fourth document in the genealogy of our Constitution, the Grand Remonstrance of 1641. Charles was given his last words. I'm going to give you a statement from those last words because he had a lot of them. Can you imagine telling a politician that he only had one more time to speak? He said this, "I'll never understand this liberty that the people were fighting so hard for. I could have provided them with greater liberty than they ever would have achieved on their own." Didn't he sign the Petition of Right of 1641, saying that liberty was the inherent possession of men and not a gift of the government? Well, you see, liberty belongs to the people, not to the government, and that's why government never gets it. Because it's here, and government doesn't have one of these. Well, this Grand Remonstrance is very interesting because it is a greater awakening. And I want to read to you a part of this Grand Remonstrance. "The root of all this mischief we find to be a malignant and pernicious design of subverting the fundamental laws and principles of government upon which the religion and justice of this kingdom are firmly established." Do you see that? This awakening made them say, hey, wait a minute, I'm seeing a pattern here. A malignant and pernicious design. This tyranny's got the same bag of tricks now for 600 years. Corruption of the court systems and the judges, property rights, foreign law, religious liberty, disarming the people, taxation without representation. And they called it a malignant and pernicious design. They said it was subverting. I looked up that word. That word subvert means to overturn and undermine. I didn't know that. I looked it up because I wanted to know. And they said this design was overturning the very fundamental principles of liberty that were firmly established. And my thought was, firmly established? It's 1641. How is anything firmly established? They didn't have internet. They didn't have C-SPAN or MSNBC or Fox to let them know what was going on in the world. How was it firmly established? They didn't have Beck or Hannity or Bortz to let them know when the king was going nuts. But you know what happened before I could answer that question? Conviction. Because I'm new to this. I'm thinking I had all that stuff. What took me so long to wake up? I'm a recovering liberal. I spent way too much time in college. And if you don't go to college as a conservative, you're not coming out as one. But you know what happened to me? My conversion was more like a sanctification process. I think it's because I'm from Missouri and we're that stubborn mule background thing. But the first thing that happened to me when I graduated from college was I got a job. And I'm looking at my paycheck realizing that I had to pay back all those student loans. Nobody had taught me that the government was supposed to do that for me. I had to pay back all those student loans. And I'm looking at my paycheck and I'm thinking, why is the government taking all my money? I've got stuff to pay. And the guy down the street still isn't doing nothing and the government's giving him all my money. This wasn't the fairness I thought taxes was supposed to be all about. Well, the next thing that happened to me is I had a family. And I realized Hillary Clinton was lying to me. It doesn't take a village to raise a child. It takes a family to raise a child. It's the ultimate responsibility of the productivity of my child falls on me. Well, my final conversion was a real one. Because when I accepted Christ as my Savior and gave my life to God, I finally understood what one nation under God really meant. It meant that God was my provider and not government. But then I started thinking about that malignant and pernicious design. Are we so intelligent? Are we so technologically advanced and superior in mind that we've somehow avoided the malignant and pernicious design? I probably don't have to answer that question for you because I think you already know the answer to that. But then I started thinking, what is the key to our malignant and pernicious design? And it occurred to me one day, actually while I was teaching. I know I have one educator here. Any other educators in the room? Ever have one of those moments where you're teaching, where you actually teach yourself something? I did. Because I asked people all over the country, have you ever heard of the glorious revolution of 1688? You're not allowed to answer that question. Have you ever heard of the glorious revolution of 1688? I travel all over the country. I can tell you less than 1% of the people that I talk to have heard of the glorious revolution of 1688, and that is the key to our malignant and pernicious design. How many of you have heard that those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it? Can I tell you that that's not entirely true? Because human nature never changes. There is nothing new under the sun. We will always repeat history. But those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. Patrick Henry said, I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of experience. I know no way to judge the future but by the past. Alexander Hamilton said that experience is the oracle of truth, and where its responses are unequivocal, they ought to be held to be sacred. Our founding fathers were telling us we didn't have to wing it. We didn't have to make it up as we were going along. We had the lamp of experience. We didn't have to guess your future because we were intimately familiar with our past. And we had an oracle of truth that told us that certain things will always happen. And we're denied this whole history because we have no idea about the glorious revolution of 1688. I teach children as well as I travel across the country. I have a 90-minute lesson plan that teaches them the difference between a republic and a democracy, that teaches them about government. We form a United States, we form states, they elect representatives, we have a constitution, and then I work their Congress through some very challenging questions. And I always ask them this: who fought in the Revolutionary War? I always get the same answer with the exception of one child one time. The Americans and the British. Problem was there were no Americans in the Revolutionary War. They were Americans by geography, but not by nationality. They were proud British citizens whose immediate history was the glorious revolution of 1688. The glorious revolution is what brought to our founders the fifth document in the genealogy of the Constitution, the English Bill of Rights of 1689. They didn't have to invent liberty. They carried it with them in the English Bill of Rights. So when George went the way of the kings before them, they didn't have to reinvent the wheel or guess at whether he was doing something right or something wrong. They knew it because they had it in writing. You see, the glorious revolution was a response to James II, who had gone the way of the kings before him. Foreign law, property rights, taking the land from the people, disarming the people, all in the name of tyranny, taking over the churches. 5 ministers petitioned the king for their rights because they had the right to petition the king of their grievances, and they said, Your Majesty, we are English. Do not force foreign law on us. We are Protestant. Do not take over our churches and mass convert us. We have the right to be true to our religion of our nation. Do you know what the king did? Executed them.